Okay, with your permission, my fellow members of the RCE community, I would like to open session 3. We try to be punctual. It's 1:30. And I trust that you had a good lunch. And now we are ready to go to session 3. Now, session 3 is a continuation of session 2 or session 1 this morning. It is on strategic discussion. This morning was part 1, and this is part 2, continuation. This morning, the issue was about transformation and the role of education. But when you speak about transformation, there must be a sense of direction. Transformation to what? Transformation to where? There must be a sense of destination that we want to go to. And so therefore, the thrust of session 3 is to have a target. We link transformation to global processes, and in particular, the Global Action Program on ASD, which is GAP, and the Sustainable Development Goals. GAP, as you know, has 5 priority areas. And although the RCE network is identified as a partner in priority area number 5, which is local solutions, multi-stakeholder approach, we are able, I'm sure, to contribute to the other priority areas as well, namely policy support, whole institution approach, training, and the involvement of youth. And at the same time, in the SDGs, although goal number 4 is explicit on education, we are not tied to just goal number 4, because education for sustainable development cuts across all the goals. As you know, that when UNESCO has produced the report at the end of the UNDESD in 2014, one of the important findings was that education and development sectors are converging, which is a positive note. Converging, but not enough. We need to have coherent policies. We need to accelerate and upscale all of the gains that we had in the UNDESD. And so therefore, we have these 2 global processes that will be the subject of the panel discussion on how RCEs can make contributions to. Now, instead of going through round by round questions on the panel, I just would like to ask them to speak in one go and address the following. 1, because the panelists are non-RCEs. They are partners of RCEs. They represent organizations which are not necessarily involved in the RCE activities. So we would like to hear from them, reflection, perspective on what they see. How can they possibly use RCEs as instruments to achieve their aspirations as well? So that is the one that we are going to hear from them. And specifically, I would like them to address the gap issues, and not necessarily all. You can pick up 1 or 2 or a combination. And SDGs, not necessarily only 4, goal 4, but a combination as well. And at the end, I would like each one of them to suggest to the RCE community a specific initiative that they would see RCE can do for them and for their organizations. So with that, let me introduce the panelists, the panel. The first one in your program, who is Ali Gofron Mokti, unfortunately is unable to come on board because of a very urgent business that he has to do in Jakarta. But fortunately, we heard from the Deputy Minister of Human Development, or what is known as Bapinas, on the SDG agenda of Indonesia, the roadmap, the development of a national action plan on SDGs, and at the sub-national level as well. He may have not mentioned explicitly RCEs, but it was implied in his speech that I think RCEs has a lot of things to do here in Indonesia. So we take that as our inspiration as well for Indonesia, and we go ahead with the rest of the panel. We have Sarot Srisai, head of the Environment Division of the ASEAN Secretariat. ASEAN stands for Association of Southeast Asian Nations, comprising of 10 countries, 10 member states in Southeast Asia. We have with Osio Miura. Osio Miura is the program specialist and team leader for education for sustainable development and global citizenship, section for educational innovation and skills development, UNESCO Bangkok. UNESCO Bangkok is represented. We have Monica McDevitt, Deputy Director of the Ecosystems Division, am I correct? Yes, of UNEP in Nairobi. And we have Naoya Tsukamoto, the ESD Project Director of UNU-IAS. And last but not least, Zol, good friend Zol Razak from the International Association of Universities. He is the immediate past president of IAU. So we have a very strong panel. And without further ado, I would like to now ask Sarot Srisai on how he sees RCE's contribution to the ASEAN, that means 10 governments.
Thank you very much, Professor Tabucanon. You all hear me? Okay. So thank you very much, the moderator, Professor Tabucanon, and a very good afternoon to you all. It's actually probably good to be the first to start, after your very sumptuous and delicious lunch. So let me formally introduce myself again, as the moderator has kindly introduced. My name is Sarot Srisai. I'm actually working for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or in short, we call it ASEAN. I'm leading the Environment Division. So in short, I'm the one responsible for all the ASEAN cooperation on environment. I know that this event is a global RCE event, so you come from everywhere in the world. So for those who are not probably familiar with the region, let me say it again, who are the 10 member states. Geographically, I'll go from the west to the east and to the south. So we have Myanmar, we have Thailand, we have Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, and Philippines. So those are the 10, because our friends who might not be very familiar with ASEAN. So those are the 10 member states comprising of ASEAN, and taking advantage of this RCE being hosted in Indonesia, in the city of Yogyakarta, where we are now. So that's why I'm representing. And I'll be speaking to you about how the RCE community, but unfortunately I could only speak on the part that I actually that I'm dealing with, which is the 10 member states of ASEAN. So I would like to address that in the region, the total of 10 countries, we are total of 600 million people. And in Asia, the projection of urbanization, development, and growth are projecting to grow very fast. So clearly, we need all that we talk here in the ASEAN region. We need sustainable consumption and production. We need many things, because otherwise if we keep going at this rate, at one point, the demand and the supply will not meet. So, and the question will be, the fact that it keep growing, the one who will bear all this responsibility will be the next generation. And in the ASEAN way, in the ASEAN system, when we work on anything, we have to work on consensus. So, okay, if we want to go like what we have to do, what the RCE can do towards sustainable development goal in ASEAN, it will be very large, and it will, it will be like a list, like many pages of list which, will not be accomplished. So I will be very focused and pick on, all those that, will be reality and that, could be implemented, that the RCE could be thinking. But before even go to that level, I would like to maybe give a very brief introduction of how ASEAN Secretariat is functioning. ASEAN Secretariat is indeed a political organization. We are similarly to, the EU and, many regional organizations out there. We are come together because, we want to work together as a cooperation. And under ASEAN Secretariat, they're sectoral body. So me, leading the environment division, meaning that my responsibility in ASEAN is only to leading the cooperation on environment. But then environment is a major part of sustainable development, but it's not the only part. So when it comes to addressing this, what RCE can do in terms of environment, and in particular in addressing the gap, the global action programs, there are 5 of them. Our role is really focusing as a secretariat in the political organization. We could do so much on the first one, which is advancing policy. The remaining, we will not be the leading agency to do so. We will be the supporting. We will be the one who, working with all the ministry of the 10 countries to tell them what the policy that, the region would like to work, would like to move our region toward. So I would like to suggest that the most realistic one in terms of policy at the moment, in terms of SDG, and in particular toward the RCE that RCE could do, because RCE has a lot of member of university and a lot of member on education. Education is actually not under me. What under me is environment. But then all Ministry of Environment are my counterpart, are the one that I have to serve for the 10 countries. But I think what we need in terms of policy, in terms of putting this as a long-term vision and sustainable, I think Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Education of the 10 countries in ASEAN have to sit together. We have to, the 2 sectoral body must sit together. I think one thing was we need to be very clear on the policy of how are we going to be able to give education on sustainable development, raise all this awareness. Currently, we have a lot of youth program, but that was only to the selected group of people that was selected to that particular. But I think at a national and in particular at a regional level, I think if the 2 sectors could work together and could provide this sustainable development education into the more or less a mainstream program within the educational system of the region, I think that would probably be one step that we could move. And then that will be the global action program that I think the region would need. And but I'm sure this might not be the same for other region represented here. And then another thing that I'd like to focus on was to respond to the SDG. As I mentioned again, when you work with 10 countries, that you need consensus, and the 10 countries that has this big wide range scope of work when it comes to sustainable development, I think you really need to pick. So again, I will be focusing on the youth. I think because currently we have so many programs on youth when it comes to RCE, when it comes to sustainable development, environment, education. So I think we will be focusing again on SDG 4, Sustainable Development Knowledge Platform. We will be trying to convince, as a secretary, we will convince the member state that these are the issue. Our youth, our next generation need to be aware, and we are planning. I think the initiative that would work would probably be we create a forums that we would probably starting with the 10, and then later on we could expand scope to be collaborating with with every regions of the world. Currently, not at this issue level. ASEAN, a political organization, we have dialogue partners. Pretty much everyone is our dialogue partner now. We are dialogue partner with all China, Japan, Korea, on that end, we are dialogue partner with India, to the west of us. We are dialogue partner with Australia, the EU as a whole, USA, so on and so forth. So I think that could also be implemented as well. That the initiative that for some sort of youth program on education that we would like to address. So then I hope that this will be the part that would contribute to SDG 4. So I think the focus now, rather than doing all 5, I think we in the ASEAN and especially at the secretariat role, we could help with the first one, advancing policy, and then we will try to promote the education to the youth, and that will contribute to the implementation of SDG 4. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ASEAN Secretariat. So may I pass on the floor to Monica, please?
Great, thank you very much. Let me just move this a tiny bit closer. I just want to thank the RCE network and Professor Tabucanon for the kind invitation to speak to you today, and just perhaps plant a few little things in your heads for our discussion after this panel. And I also want to thank Saroj for setting the scene very nicely, because much of what he said about the way ASEAN works is very similar to that of the UN. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about UN Environment Program's role in the SDGs, and also in how we can look at supporting the implementation of the Global Action Plan. In terms of the UN Environment Program, I think one thing we all need to be aware of is that the UN Environment Program was instrumental in ensuring that environment was integrated into the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's actually surprising to learn and to know how hard fought that actually was. And so I think we do take an awful lot of pride in that, and we champion the environment through all aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think if we look at the 3 ethos or guiding principles of the Sustainable Development Goals, that of universality, integration, and leaving no one behind, it truly is the integrated approach that allows UNEP, or the UN Environment Program, to play a significant and a major role. And that, I think, is where we see a huge opportunity to work with the regional centers of expertise. And so where can we actually look at working together as the Prof has given us our marching orders? Well, first and foremost, I think, as Saroj also said, is that we take the long view. We take an intergenerational approach to looking at sustainability and environment. And that means that we need to ensure that future generations are not burdened with the negative impacts of our current resource exploitation and consumption demands. So there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. Of the 5 priority areas of the Global Action Plan, advancing policy, transforming learning and training environments, building capacities of educators and trainers, empowering and mobilizing youth, and accelerating sustainable solutions at the local level, I would offer that the UN Environment Program actually works in all of those areas. And so much of what we do can cross-cut and really contribute to any area of work that the regional centers of expertise work on. But one area in particular that I do want to single out is a program that we have called the Environmental Education and Training Unit. Many of you will be familiar with this group through my predecessor, Mahesh Pradhan, and the Nairobi conference that was held 4 years ago. And what we need to do is to look at how we can work with the Global Universities Partnership for Environment and Sustainability. Some of you will know it as GUPES, but our new executive director at the UN Environment Program has banned the use of acronyms. And so we have to get used to articulating what we do and making sure that we can communicate well. And in that respect, education, I think, is very well recognized as a fundamental sector in sustainability and transformation from at least 3 perspectives. One is from a demand side. There's a huge demand for knowledge and experience sharing on global best practices to build innovation and unleash creativity. And secondly, from a supply perspective, as a source of human capital and being able to influence societal change in all areas of the SDGs, not just any one and not just particularly education because you're coming from an educational perspective. And thirdly, I think, as I said in my intervention this morning, that of a continuous learning perspective, and that education is not only for those in formal institutions, but we have to continuously ensure that we are building up the skills, capabilities, and capacities of our decision makers and our policy makers. So I think there's a huge opportunity to work together in that area. Specifically, which is what we were asked to do, with our network of global universities, one of the areas where we have started to work on is building tools and training materials, drawing from the expertise that we have through our own staff and through our own networks within the UN system and outside the UN system on every aspect of the environment. And so we take those resources, we look at how we can convert them into tools that are applicable and useful for education purposes, working through partners. And again, I think that's where the Regional Centers of Expertise Network is an enormously powerful partner, because we can't do everything ourselves. Let me give you an example. We are working with some universities and some of our partner institutes on what are called hackathons. Some of you may know what a hackathon is, where you're given a real-life problem, a complex problem, and all kinds of resources, lock students in a room in a very meaningful way, and ask them to solve the problem. And it's amazing the kind of innovative solutions they come up with. And so being able to network across universities, have teams working virtually, using technology to interact and to engage is a very powerful and fun way to actually exchange experiences. We've also created a number of MOOCs, massive open online courses, with our university partners. So a lot of the information that comes both from within the UN system on environment and also our partners is open and shared in an educational context through our MOOCs. And I think there's another opportunity where we can tap into the expertise of the RCE network. From a policy perspective, because that's very much the sphere that the UN Environment Programme works on, we also work with governments to create enabling social and legislative conditions to both foster integrative approaches and participate in owning and achieving the SDGs. So for us, that's very, very important. And one thing I think we always have to keep in mind, even from an educational perspective, the environment and environmental sustainability and development is not only about science. It's also about social sciences, economic sciences. So when I talk about education, when I talk about science, or even the environment, it's within a very comprehensive and holistic perspective that I do that. So I do take social and economic issues into mind when we talk about policy perspectives. I think what we also need to look at very carefully is how we can engage the youth. And as Saroj said, it's a very important part of the way that we look at environmental sustainability and education. We heard last night from one of our speakers at the gala last night that the communities, local communities, are losing young people to the urban areas, to urban settings. And I think what we need to do is inculcate a belief that the youth can in fact contribute to a fulfilling lifestyle, to aspire to economic prosperity, and to make a meaningful contribution to society in communities. And I also think we have to get away from this aspect of communities mean rural communities. There are many, many types of communities that really do need to look at how do we have an inclusive ability to contribute, not just from the city's perspective. So how do we keep people engaged where they are, finding solutions where they are? And I think finally, we need to look at community as a very powerful convening body of multiple interests that needs to be tapped into, engage with one another, and also to be truly inclusive, to realize the goals of the SDGs and to implement the action plans that we have. So one thing that I do want to leave you with is this idea of partnerships, which is very much Sustainable Development Goal number 17. And that's where I think UNEP and all other UN entities really do come into their own right, is that we cannot do things alone. We must partner. We must partner with other networks, and we must partner with other institutes. And in a way, I'd like to follow my dear friend Akpezi, although they're very formidable shoes to follow in. I just want to leave you with an African proverb that I quite enjoy, and that is, if you want to travel fast, go alone. If you want to travel far, go together. And in that way, I think we all do need to work together to achieve the aims of the Sustainable Development Goals and our action plans. And I think that's what we can do together. So I'll leave you with those thoughts and look forward to taking your questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. So there we are. We have a menu of possibilities for RCEs to engage with UNEP through your various initiatives, especially in higher education and engagement with governments. So we will come back to this after we have all the panel, we've heard all the panelists to an open discussion. But for the time being, let me now move on to UNESCO Bangkok. Oshio Miura will be speaking now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and also having me here to join you at this very important event. I see a lot of familiar faces and also new faces. I'm glad to meet you and see you all. I'm Ushio Miura, by the way, so forgot to say, from UNESCO Bangkok. UNESCO Bangkok is a regional office for education. Regional, it means Asia Pacific. We cover about 48 countries in the Asia Pacific region, spanning from Iran on the west to Kazakhstan on the north, New Zealand on the south, and Cook Islands and other Pacific islands on the east. And since we work in education, I would like to start today building on our UNEP's colleagues' introduction to the entire SDGs, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I'd like to zoom into the education goal 4, SDG 4, especially the target 4.7, which specifically refers to education for sustainable development. Do we have the PPT on the screen? Oh, okay. Sorry, the target 4.7 is under SDG 4 on education, which, can you show, sorry. I'm sorry, it doesn't, okay, thank you. Yes, it's SDG 4, there's 17 goals under the 2030 agenda. And the fourth one is specifically on education. Under this goal, there are 10 targets, including 3 means of implementation. And then among these 10 targets, the 7th target refers to ESD. Next slide, please. Yes. This target has a very, very long text, but the essence of it is at the start of this sentence. By 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. Under SDG 4, among the 10 targets, this is the only target that refers to the word sustainable development, in fact. And because this is the only target that puts sustainable development at the core, the Global Education Monitoring Report 2016 says this target is the most closely aligned with the vision of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Could you show the next slide, please? Yes. And that this target is what links education and SDG 4 to other SDGs. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I can't see the. Yes. The target aims to promote SDG, as I just mentioned. And if we are to promote sustainable development, we need to enable everyone to engage in sustainable development. And therefore, this target applies to everyone, children, young people, and adults. And because such learning for sustainable development needs to occur everywhere, in communities, at home, at work, and in schools, and because sustainable development is an ongoing process, never complete, learning for sustainable development needs to take place throughout life. So this target, 4.7, applies to everyone, children, young people, and adults, everywhere, in communities, at home and at work, in schools, and throughout life. Next slide, please. Now, the question is, how do we move forward in attaining this target? It is quite obvious that in order to acquire skills for sustainable development, in order to help everyone to acquire knowledge and skills for sustainable development, education needs to do more than the mere transmission of knowledge about sustainable development. We need something more to acquire skills for sustainable development, more participatory, active, experiential, inquiry-based learning processes, learning that embraces the famous 4 pillars of learning: learning to know, to do, to be, and to live together. The target gives some examples of approaches and entry points for such learning to take place, such as global citizenship education, ESD, education for peace and sustainable, peace and nonviolence. Now, having said all that, RCEs, being multi-stakeholder platforms, I think they're very well placed to catalyze such a process for learning for sustainable development that applies to everyone, that occurs everywhere, and takes place throughout life. So the question is, how can RCEs support further? They're doing great job so far. Now, how do we bring RCEs to provide communities with further support for such learning for sustainable development to take place? GAP, the Global Action Program for ESD, which all of us know very well about by now, can provide some directions for RCEs to promote ESD toward achieving this target. And needless to mention, there are 5 priority areas, but RCEs can contribute all of these areas. And in my view, in particular, in view of the application of this target for everyone, everywhere, throughout life, RCEs can be especially effective in the whole community approach. And by whole community approach, I don't mean only about the priority action area 5 on local level actions, but something like Okayama City, what Okayama City is doing in our region in Asia and the Pacific, or something like, I just went to listen to the experience of the river restoration movement in Indonesia, promoted by the RCE Yogyakarta here. But those are some of the examples that RCEs can aspire to in order to bring everyone in communities toward attaining the target 4.7. And as I said, I have seen many RCEs doing great jobs in promoting ESD in local levels, and UNESCO looks forward to continuous cooperation with all of you and further developments of your work to promote ESD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oshio. You guided us through goal 4.7, and as you see, when we look at the goals and the target, sometimes it's difficult to imagine what could be the entry point for RCEs to contribute to. But if you go down to the indicators level, maybe it might become clearer. Go down to the indicators level, you will see that it's getting more visible where RCEs can do, perhaps to, not only for goal 4, but for all other goals in SDGs. So that might be, but it was a very good introduction as far as education is concerned. And we will come back to Oshio later on after we have heard all the panelists. And now we move on to Naoya Tsukamoto from UNU-IAS.
Thank you, Mario, and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to make a suggestion from the viewpoint of United Nations University or the RCE Network Secretariat, how we can improve our activity or our contribution to the global agenda. First, I see my general idea, and then I would like to say something about very specific examples. I see the development of RCE network, for example, 3 steps. The first step is the just increasing number of the member of our network. We started from 6, and then now we have 149, big family. The second step is to increase our internal relationship. We have some structure of our network activity, like a global conference, regional conference, and so on. So we now have a lot of opportunity to exchange information, to learn each other, and then to improve our own activities. I see the third phase of our evolution is that to contribute to the international agenda, expanding our scope of activity from just within the network, but towards outside of the network to the international agenda. I believe we are in a position to contribute. And I think this is very good things for us, because to raise RCE's profile nationally and internationally is very helpful for us to make our job easily. International recognition, national recognition, to contribute SDGs, to contribute various international agenda, helps us. But it is not any additional burden for us. Actually, we are working on the ground various activities which are all contribute to the SDG agenda to solve various international agenda, I believe. And how you can do that, how you can raise your profile nationally, it is quite important to have a very close relationship, communication, or sometimes cooperation with your national government, and sometimes national politicians, if appropriate. And internationally, we, the RCE Secretariat, Network Secretariat, UNU, can work with you to raise your profile internationally. And in order to do that, we need various communication with you, including annual report, which is provided to us. But we, if possible, need to raise the level of our communication to make UNU possible to provide an international forum that we, RCE as a network, is very tangible manner, in a very tangible manner, contributing, providing solutions. And I'd like to show you some very specific examples here. Deforestation or degradation of the forest is a big problem for us, for our country, for the international world. Why? Because it is very bad for the conservation of biodiversity, or 20% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from deforestation or degradation of the forest. But at last but not at least, there are so many people who rely on the forest for their lives. So sometimes in some situation, regulation of cutting forest is effective. For example, very remote area for multinational enterprises, such a regulation is a very good solution. But almost every cases, there are people who live on the forest. And we have to achieve sustainable use of forest and sustainable life of local people. And this is what so many RCE colleagues are now working on. We have actual activities on the ground. So it is in my sense, it is very easy for us to raise our profile in the various fields of the international agenda. Just for example, for the forest and the sustainable forest management. And in addition to that, for example, now we have a big international agenda under the Convention on the Conservation of Biodiversity. There are so many will in the world. We want to protect the biodiversity. But the most, I would say, most big barrier or important thing is persuade people, persuade politicians, persuade enterprises, or persuade ourselves. Why? Why biodiversity is important? What is the value of the biodiversity? In order to answer this question, IPBES was established, International Panel on Biodiversity Ecosystem Service. This panel is very unique. They are seeking for scientific answers, scientific assessment to answer the question, but they do not rely only to so-called Western science. It puts so much emphasis on the local indigenous knowledges. They want to include such a knowledges into the assessment, into the answer why nature is important, what value nature has. So we are working on the ground, we are working with indigenous communities, and we can help them, for example, making documentation of local knowledge, or to help the views, the way of thinking, or their practices of local community or indigenous people's community to input to such a national or regional or international process. So such and such, we are in a position to contribute to the international agenda through very tangible action, which we are actually doing. There's nothing to lose, but there's so much for the international society and for ourselves to make our jobs in a very good manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Naoya. It goes without saying, of course, that the RCE movement is a flagship initiative of UNU. It's a vehicle to translate policies into implementation, and also it helps achieve the mandate of UNU as well, of course. So the last speaker, but not the least certainly, is Zol Razak from IAU, who will speak about the issue of RCEs and GATT and SDGs.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank you for having IAU here. Let me just explain to you a little bit about IAU, International Association University, for those of you who are not familiar. There is an affiliated, or rather very closely associated with UNESCO, based in Paris. We have got about 700 members spanning 120 countries around the world. And sustainable development is indeed one of the flagship of the association, way before sustainable development became fashionable. We, in fact, one of the supporters of the Kyoto Protocol at an early stage in the early 80s. So it is something that we hold very dearly to our hearts, and I would like to recognize the Deputy Secretary General, Dr. Hilish Van Lan, who is also very passionate driving this forward. Yeah? After the 2014 conference, IAU has chosen to take the whole institution approach as one of the core business of the association to push the agenda of sustainable development together with our members. And this is something that I want to share with you. And whole institution approach is one of those things that was mentioned in priority 2 in GAPS, and certainly it also has something to do with SDG, has been mentioned by many of the panelists before this. What I'm going to share with you today is basically an outcome of the discussion we had among many countries yesterday in a workshop when we discussed precisely about the same thing. How do RCE actually contribute to sustainable development in a very prolonged and sustained way, right? I would like to start by all recognizing that all of us actually work very hard with the community, understanding the community and trying to solve some of their major problems. And one of the issues that I think we are good at is basically trying to understand the issues and the problem in the context of the community itself. In other words, we are quite familiar with what the community is all about and what are the issues at hand, and therefore we begin to engage the community in trying to find out what the issue is all about. Yeah? So this engagement is something that I think RCE is very well endowed with. We work on the ground, unlike many other associations that works perhaps at a higher level, but most of us work on the ground together with the people, and therefore engaging the community is one of the forte of RCE. Co-creating knowledge, co-creating solutions, and trying to understand the deeper meaning of those solutions and issues that is facing the community at large. So that is one, I think, contribution of RCE that is very significant as compared to many associations that I know in this particular context. Yeah? Now, after having this is an opportunity for RCE now, under the whole institution or community approach, to take the issue forward in trying to make it into a kind of a proposal. Doesn't work. Yeah? In a kind of a proposal that takes it higher into governments, into legislation, even into city centers and so on and so forth. This is another value add that I think RCE can take on, because not only we are linked with the grassroots, but we also link with people in the higher echelon that we can actually match up some of the issues and some of the proposal that we need to put in. Yeah? So that is the second issue that I think we are good at, and trying also to mesh out with funders and sponsors who are able to support the proposal that we want to advance in the context of sustainable development. Yeah? We can also be the middleman, or for want of a better word, the mediator, yeah, between the funders and the community in trying to understand that whatever is funded actually do not sideline or is not at the expense of the community. We can be the person who speaks for the community in trying to understand where the fund is coming from, and sometimes not only the funders, there's the sponsors who can give in kind rather than in cash. Right? These are the other issues that I think RCE can play very well. Now, on that note, I think we can then, after understanding where the funds is coming from, who is sponsoring it, making sure that the agenda of the community remains as it is, or if not, change very much, right? Then we can take it to a different level where policy decisions are taken. And this is where the policy decision becomes important in trying to enshrine many of the agendas and the elements of ESD, particularly in the planet, people, prosperity sort of dimension. And I think this is, again, something that RCE is endowed to play a very significant role in this particular context, all right? And if you dissect that very closely, you will see at least 4 elements. There may be a policy recommendation that we put forward in the proposal that is going to be funded. The legislature, whoever is responsible for this, will try to put into a kind of policy formation. That is probably their role to do so. And RCE will come in again in trying to implement it, in trying to make sure that we understand that the whole elements of ESD is not compromised. And many RCEs come forward to take the implementation role so that we are assured that at the end of the day, what is recommended is actually being implemented as such. Yeah? And therefore, the question of evaluation, the question of making sure that it is translated into reality is something, again, that RCE is good at, right? In the discussion, I think there is also some problems, some issues, and one of the issues, what do we do with indigenous practitioners? What do we do with indigenous knowledge, which is actually not mainstream and not dominant? Yeah? And from this one, I think we learn from our colleagues from Peru that does magnificent things. In other words, they have got a kind of a platform for dialogue between the traditional practitioners and the modern practitioners, and people like us, and trying to understand what the epistemology is all about, how we can get into common grounds and trying to pursue the goal of sustainable development in a particular context. They've done it to an extent that now they have got a kind of a platform where the city and the university and the higher education and the practitioners sit on together and do this as kind of an ongoing exercise, trying to bridge the gaps between the two knowledge, traditional, modern, or scientific. Yeah? To the extent, we were told, now they are able to issue a diploma. Yeah? They are able to issue diplomas to people who have gone through this, really understand it, and become now the new mediators of knowledge. And I think this is a fantastic thing. We will not then be living or marginalizing traditional knowledge at the expense of so-called dominant language or dominant culture as such. Yeah? So these are some of the things that we discuss. And in this particular context, again, RCE becomes a person, the group that empowers this bridging of knowledge. Can somebody help me? Yeah? Building the knowledge between traditional and scientific or modern knowledge together, and also ensuring that is kept in a way that you do not compromise sustainable development. So from this whole institution, the whole community approach, we can at least identify 5 major roles that RCE can play effectively in ensuring that sustainable development not only remain as part of awareness, but being translated into reality. On that note, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sol. So now we have heard from ASEAN, Secretariat, UNEP, UNESCO, UNU-IAS, and IAU. Now, I think we can entertain a few questions before we wrap up the session. So the floor is open for questions, clarifications, or commentaries, or whatever you would like to. Anybody? Yeah. Dr. Sunchai from RCE Cham, Thailand.
Thank you. I'm very sleepy, so I would like to recommend you. And we have some questions about maybe the Professor Naoya is recommend this about the forest degradation. We should accept that RCE is not under belong to the government because we established by the university or in the maybe the foundation, in some foundation established. So the RCE is cannot maybe the manage our budget by ourselves, but the RCEs maybe belong to the university. University will ask the budgets to the government, and government is send the budget to the university, or the foundation, they can ask the budget from the private sector or some area and manage in the area. So if like this, RCE should be like the center for the dissemination about the scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge. We should do study about this, do research, or you enhance the traditional knowledge. It's very important. Because if you can extend this to the people, local people, the community, they can work, implement about the knowledge. And also for the government will get the knowledge from the RCE and to set the policy. And the government agencies, they can implement the policy. That's if like this, RCE will be very successful in the country or in the area. The example, you would like to protect the forest area. The forest area now is everywhere in the world, maybe includes my country also. We have the government's office look after the forest area, every area. Now we have the technique of the remote sensing. Technique of the remote sensing, you can check every tree in the boundary or in the forest. So if we try to recommend the technique to the government, how to check the tree in the area, that the responsibility, if have someone to cut, is maybe we know from the technology now, but why is now is still deforestation in many countries is a problem like that. So that when they cut the forest, the problem is biodiversity. It's lost. About bacteria, fungi, or many animals cannot stay in this area. That's a big problem more than the maybe the carbon emission like this. So I think this about the example technique that we should try to apply to the area or to the government in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it was not a question, it's a comment, but if anybody would like to, it was a comment. With Dr. Sonchai, thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. Detlef?
I really have a question. Mr. Tsukamoto said a very wise word. The RCE have nothing to lose. Yeah, I agree completely too. But what could they gain? What could the benefit for the RCE besides to be appreciated and to be seen as active partners?
It was addressed to Tsukamoto-san, please.
Thank you very much. I think, for example, all RCEs, I believe, has a very good cooperation with your own government, but the level of cooperation or level of relationship is maybe different. But now, I hope and believe every national government is working very hard to achieve national sustainable development goals, and they want a partner to work with them. And I think we are RCEs are in a very good position to be recognized as a very important partner to achieve national SDG plans, national SDG targets. To be recognized in that manner, I believe would make us work very easily in your country. You will get very good recognition by the government, sometimes good support or cooperation from the local or national government, and you will get another additional partners to work with on. Internationally, we have a very nice family here, international network, but I would like to say that unfortunately, or very fortunately, we have only single financial source which help us is the Ministry of the Environment of Japan. But if our profile raised internationally as a network, I believe that we can find diversified financially or any in-kind supporters to our activity or partners with us to work with. So we can expand, we can reinforce our activity nationally and internationally through improve our recognition as RCE independent or as RCE network. This is what I envisage. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, please.
Thank you very much. Alibukar Amari is my name. I'm from RCE Kano. I want to share my experience and at the same time make a comment. My experience in trying to link up with other United Nations organs. Most of the RCEs here don't have United Nations university outlet in their domains. But most of us here have either UNESCO or UNEF offices or regional offices in our country. Our own experience is we've tried as much as we could to link off with our UNESCO, UNEF local offices, particularly in Africa, but that was not possible. We've written several emails. In Japan, we met Alexander Lish. We complained to him. He gave us an email that we should communicate to. We wrote an email to that email he gave us. He gave us the name of contacts we are going to meet in our local offices. We did, and up to date, we're waiting for response from those officers of UNESCO. So what I'm trying to say is, since all of us are here, so we should formulate modalities whereby RCEs as unit or set of units will be able to link off with the UNESCO local offices for project of scaling and the rest. Our greatest asset as RCEs are our expertise, and we are ready to share it with each and every organ of United Nations so that we move together. So we are not very economical. The reasons why we are here, the basis of our meeting here is to collaborate and partner with each other. And I see no reason why we cannot do that back home. So I think we should create a forum. United Nations University is here, a representative of UNESCO and UNEF is here. So maybe we can create modalities whereby it will be easier and simpler for RCEs in our local domains to be able to collaborate with this United Nations United Nations organs in our local communities. I want to believe that the water of our own similarities is thicker than the blood of our own differences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Monica, would you like to respond?
Sure, I'll make some comments to your concerns, and I'm sorry you haven't heard back from the UN entities that you may have written to. I think, as you may be aware, all three of us who are sitting at the table here, United Nations Environment Programme, UNESCO, and UNU, we are not resident UN programs, so we work at the global level, so we don't have offices in every single country. So yes, it is sometimes difficult to be on the ground, working with you. But I would like to assure you that there are many occasions where we do partner with institutes at the country level. The modalities or the operational implementation of working together with a UN entity is generally through an agreed implementation plan, a program of work, a deliverable that we are bound by our governments, our governing bodies to deliver. And so we need to look for those opportunities where we can bring in your expertise, where we can work together on very concrete deliverables. And the practicality of that, and I will talk in very practical terms, is that in order to work together, there is generally an expectation of engagement that involves money of some sort, whether it's coming to a conference or participating in a workshop, or whether it is engaging and paying experts for their expertise. There's always an issue of money in there somewhere. So we depend very much on our donor members, our member states, to provide us with those funds to be able to implement what we call our program of work, and that we do the work that is required by the governments. So I think we do need to sit down and look at very concrete possibilities of where we can engage in projects that we are already bound by our governments, who are our member states in the UN, to deliver for them and on behalf of your governments. So that may not be an entirely satisfactory approach, but I would like to talk to you more about how the UN engages and how we actually work in partnerships, because we often say a lot, and we often say that we do work in partnerships and that we want to work in partnerships, but the actual ways in which we do that require some very fundamental agreements to be able to engage. I think workshops like this are an excellent opportunity to raise those opportunities, but again, in terms of actually engaging at the project level, at the community level, it is very challenging for us to meet all the demands and all the requests that are posed to us, given that we're global, given that we do work for over 194 countries. So I'd turn over to my other colleagues in the UN as well for them to respond perhaps from a different perspective.
Would UNESCO, UNU-IAS, UNESCO first, yeah.
Yes, I do reiterate our colleague and apologize about the late. Still, you haven't heard from them, I suppose, and we really apologize about that. UNESCO, well, as much as we're not in every country, but I'm sorry, which country were you from again? Nigeria. We are in Nigeria. Yes. We are in Nigeria. We are in some countries, and then even in those countries where we do have offices, we are specialized agencies, so we are very small, we have very small staff. Normally in every office there's only one person who's working on education, and then usually the person wouldn't be working in all the areas, but on some specialized areas. And sometimes, depending on the office where the specialty is not ESD, for example, then the response may be delayed, or there may be not much of an interest to work on ESD as well. But there are other, I think I agree with you about the need to have a more systematic approach to our collaboration in those such cases, because there are other offices of UNESCO, for example, who do work closely with RCEs. Recently, for example, our office in Almaty, Kazakhstan, they have asked for expertise, technical support from RCE Kyrgyzstan. So it's just one very recent example. But so depending, it depends on the office, but I agree with you that it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be ad hoc like that. And therefore, I think it's a very good idea that we, UNESCO, the headquarters and the UNN start discussing some ways to have a more systematic ways of cooperation and utilizing the wealth of resources that RCEs around the world have. Thank you for the advice. Very appreciated.
Thank you. UNU-IAS?
Thank you very much. Actually, I was working in the government for many years, and I had so many opportunity to work with international organizations. And I recognize that even though international organizations looks very great, looks very powerful, looks to be able to solve our problem, the answer is no. Sorry. But the function of international organization is provide platform for the players. The players, I mean governments. International governments work together. They can solve problems. They can demonstrate so much power to change the world. But in order to do so, we need coordination We need support. We need various arrangement. We need various such and such coordination. And the United Nations organizations are very capable, very helpful for the governments to make such a coordination, make such an agreement for actions. And when it comes to United Nations, I very thank you for your question, which makes me rethinking about the definition of UNU. UNU has very unique position under the United Nations. Still, we are university. We have the freedom of study, freedom of research. Even though we are under the United Nations system, UNU is rather free from the governments. That's why we have direct communication with you through RCE network. This is very, for me, for you, very, very rare opportunity. We have direct connection with United Nations system, with RCEs. So why don't you enjoy our relationship and use this good opportunity to raise the profile of ourselves, or to make our work much more, to help our work to make easy to do our work through the recognition through the international society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now this session started at 1:30, so technically we still have time, but the original schedule says that we are supposed to finish at 2:30. So in order to catch up with the schedule as originally planned, so I suggest that we try to finish before 3. And we heard the intervention from Asia Pacific, from Europe, from Africa. We haven't heard from the Americas. So unless there is a question or comment from an American colleague, then I would like to terminate the discussion now. Is there any question, preferably from the Americas, so that we have all the regions represented? None? All right, so I would like to end up the session perhaps with just a minute of referring back to the moderator's notebook, what I have taken notes here. We heard from the ASEAN Secretariat that the possibility for RCEs to get involved with them is through advancing policy, because they are the Secretariat. So they can only deal with policy issues with governments, member states, but the implementations belong to the countries. But they could, of course, open some doors for those RCEs in those countries, perhaps, to start the process of engagement. And ASEAN is not just engaged with 10 countries, but they have dialogue partners, ASEAN plus 6, plus 3, plus whatever you have. So that's an opening. Then UNEP's role for SDGs and GAP, well, since they champion environmental issues in all aspects, so therefore there is a wide range of possibilities that RCEs could engage with UNEP, and especially with respect to GAP, I think they are very much into higher education. They are partnering with universities. They are developing MOOCs on SDESD with partner universities. And as you know, that 80% of the RCEs in the world are led by universities. So there is a wide area of potential collaboration, and also the partnership goal number 17 was emphasized, that perhaps we could do that as well through UNEP. And the same thing with UNESCO. UNESCO, there are a lot of possibilities to work with UNESCO, And you also know that UNESCO is present in all countries, member states of UNESCO, like they have the Commission, National Commission of UNESCO in countries. And of course, the regional offices are there in the various continents. So that's an open possibility for RCEs. UNU-IAS, as I said earlier, it goes without saying that we promote the movement. We initiated the movement. We promote the RCE movement and help build international relations and expanding the profile of RCEs so that it is more known in international processes. And IAU, with their whole institution approach and the process of engagement, I think can help very much the GAP implementation. And as we know that IAU is comprised of 600 member universities around the world, and I'm sure that our universities are members of, or most of us are members of IAU. So there is a wealth of possibilities that we could. So as we close the session, we continue, of course, the discussion, our aspiration to engage not only stakeholders of RCEs, but the partners who are there with us and who could possibly make use of RCEs as instruments of change or transformation for their respective mandates. So with that, I would like to thank you all, thank the panelists for the excellent presentations and sharing of reflections, not only personal, but of course, organizational, and for your questions, comments, and thank you all for listening. I would like to pass on the floor now to the Secretariat organizers for some logistical issues.
Thank you, Professor Mario Tabucanon, and please give applause for our speakers and also for our moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the end of our third session. Before we proceed to the fourth session, we are going to have break for 15 minutes. So we are going to start the fourth session at 3 sharp, downstairs, first floor. And this fourth session is a parallel session. The participants would be divided by region. The room E would be for Africa, with participants from Africa, and room F would be the participants from Americas, and room A would be for the participants from Asia Pacific, and room B from Europe. And all the committees would be on the stage to guide you after the break. The fourth session would last for 2 hours, so we expect you to go back to this place after the fourth session. So, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the refreshment and see you again later this evening.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Thank you.
My pleasure.
The problem is we couldn't see the slide.
Good job.